So this idea of applying economic principles to permaculture excites me. So I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
And the question I asked you was, what are the economic principles that you think are important that we could apply to permaculture?
Yes.
And you answered me and we wrote it down because we like to write things down. Those principles, and we're going to have a different video about each one of these, is supply and demand and surplus. How do we deal with those in the system? Economic indicators, as we understand the world, and how can we measure at the world level, but I'm also interested in economic indicators here.
Yes.
And we've talked about that, like, what's my income, what am I producing, and stuff like that. Economies of scale and economies of scope. Externalities, which I don't understand completely, so we're going to have to talk about that. I think I've been misusing the word. Resources and environment, and all those issues are very important. So this next series of videos you can check out, and we're going to discuss each one of these issues. Sound good?
I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing your economic wisdom here. We're going to have some fun.
Thank you for receiving me.
As we think about these different principles of permaculture, I am going to recommend a great book. It's Permaculture, Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability, by David Holgren, one of the guys who started permaculture. And it talks about the 12 principles of permaculture.
This was the book that Brian gave to me when I started here at the Bosque village, and the things that I rated was exactly reading this and which one of the topics, what topics in economics they remind me. So it's a really good book.
Right, and what I like about these principles is that they're not just applicable to agriculture. A lot of times permaculture is very focused on agriculture and energy use, but really economics applies to all of life,
Yes.
and I think permaculture can apply to all of life. So as we look at these principles, we want to expand our minds a little bit and apply them to everything we do. Great book. I recommend it highly. So let's talk about supply and demand and surplus. Now, you wrote about it here. What are your thoughts in general after having studied permaculture about how supply and demand and surplus apply to permaculture?
Okay. The first thing is how supply and demand applies to classical economy. And a good point that it's not a good point actually, but how supply and demand applies to classical economy is basically we when we talk about economies we are always talking about humans. That's a giant difference about economies and the permaculture. When I talk about supply and demand, we are talking about what humans need and what are people offering to humans.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the first difference between these two topics. Permaculture are trying to be sustainable, to give food to every environment. We are not trying to feed the world for humans. We are trying to feed the world for every kind of species. So that's a giant difference between the two topics. Uh, Supply and demand, they have interaction. So when we talk about demand, is what people are searching for, what people want. And this can be like, I want something, but I don't have money for buying this. It's still a demand. You are something that you are looking for. And you have a supply when people are offering things on the market. So using the connection between them is that people are ordering things and then people can offer things. So the supply is always related to the demand. So supply is a response to demand.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a cross point between these two, that's where you have the perfect quantity and the perfect price. That's the classical theory about supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
A different thing is that if you are talking about feed the whole world, we changed completely the idea of supply.
Mm-hmm.
What we are offering to the world. Because I may not eat something, I may not eat rest of fruit. I may not eat a kind of food, a
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. I may not need something, but other person, um, other organism might use it. So we are not relating only humans here.
Right. Yeah, for the Bosque project, that's something I've said often, is that people come here and sometimes they expect to see a more normal looking farm, uh, and they say, well, why would you grow something that you can't eat, for example? Well, we're not just trying to feed the people. We're trying to feed the entire ecosystem. We want a biodiverse ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of who we're supplying to and what the and who's demanding things is not human focused. We are part of it. Of course, we're going to always think about the people. We're not going to forget about the people. But yeah, we definitely don't want to be human focused. This makes me think. I mean, even where you were talking, it's just about so many issues. I mean, we look at supply and demand in the entire world,
Mm-hmm.
and how we have a limited supply of a bunch of stuff that we're over harvesting. We're over harvesting oil. That's stored sunlight. We're over harvesting the oceans.
Yes.
And so our supply is actually diminishing. We're increasing our demand. A lot of what I'm interested in is decreasing our demand, decreasing our consumption. And this doesn't mean living worse. I think we can live better while we consume worse. So I'm thinking all kinds of things here. And then as far as the economics of this project, like what things do we decide to sell or develop as products?
Yes. Yes, because a good thing is like yield. Yield.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yield is one of
Yield.
the principles of the permaculture. And if we pick up the concept of yield, that is anything or something that are usable that you can extract.
Right.
Not necessarily extract, but are there for being used. Am I
Mm-hmm.
right?
I didn't understand all that, but yeah, sure. Anyway,
So,
sometimes we have a surplus here in the Bosque. The goal is to produce more surplus with less resources while protecting the entire environment.
yes.
That's the goal.
Yes.
So it's a great concept to apply.
Uh, cut. We should.
So I've been in a lucky position with the project where I haven't really had to rely on yield to survive. In fact, I've occasionally produced too much product, I've produced too much food, and I've just given it away
Mhm.
and haven't even gained from it. So what else do I need to think about, or do we need to think about as we apply getting a yield, obtaining a yield to
Mhm.
permaculture?
Yeah, that was a thing that get a lot of interest because, as I understand, yield is something that we can extract or we can obtain from some element. Can be an animal, can be human, can be an extractor, but you can obtain something. And when you talk about obtaining things, usually, and that's a point, a lot of supply are based in one only spot. Like, uh, if you have a surplus, get lost. uh, I think we
Okay,
can just
okay.
skip. So, a, a, a thinking that I was having was when talking about surplus, I return to the point that I said. We are always talking about humans.
Mm-hmm.
So when I talk about surplus, we are talking that after people have desired things and have your desires uh, done, so satisfied,
Mm-hmm.
you could have a surplus. It's a quantity that you have more than it was needed.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe because people don't have money to buy it, or because you you did too much, you worked too much, or you produced it too much.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have a surplus with this.
Right.
And what usually people do with surplus? This surplus can be food, and you can storage. You can have a surplus of money, and you can save it. A good thing is that a surplus here isn't necessary. Like, let's think about food. If we have a surplus of food, usually what happens? If you pick up news and things like this, you can see that we have a lot of food that are getting rotten every day.
Mm-hmm.
What we use for where this can be put as a surplus. This is a quantity that people demand, but is produced more.
Mm-hmm.
In permaculture, this can be put in a lot of other cycles. We have organical cycles. We can
Mm-hmm.
give this food to chickens. We can give this food to composting. When
Yeah.
I'm talking, of course, about a small place, because in the
Right.
ideal world, of course, that this surplus should be given to people, but this a relationship between prices and quantity that's a little bit more complex
Mm-hmm.
and I really don't know how to do these connections right now. I didn't have time, but that was a really good point for me. Start thinking,
Yeah.
how can we recreate the relationships between prices and quantity?
Right. Well, one thing we do here at the Bosque is we turn waste into valuable product because waste is like bad surplus, right?
Yes.
And so we've gone to the market and we've got food waste and we've given that to the chickens. And so I actually have written online about all the types of waste that we use here because in permaculture there shouldn't be any waste. It always turns into something that's valuable. So waste and surplus are actually kind of related. And then there's other kinds of surplus where we produce more useful things, and that's normally what economists think about is price and supply, demand, et cetera, and how surplus affects that. Um, Interesting topic.
Yes. I think the main point is recording how supply and demand are always connected to humans' welfare, and of course that we can question a lot of this welfare
Right.
because people are starving and we have food getting rotten. But
Yeah.
putting on permaculture, we can think about surplus, demand, supply, but food in the world, not only feeding humans.
Right.
So things are getting used with not not losing energy. We are
Right.
using things in a lot of other connections. We need to
Right.
connect things.
Right. And not just think
Yes.
about it in a business sense, but
Yes.
in terms of the entire ecological
Yes.
system of the world.
And these apply,
Brilliant.
these will have consequences in price, and these will have consequences in quantities.
Beautiful.
So
I love it.
I hope there's a beautiful consequences.
So as we apply economics to permaculture, we want to think about economic indicators. What economic indicators do we use in economics?
Yes, that's a giant thing because the first question is how we measure things in economics. So how can I say this country is a good country? This country is good for is having a good track. And I think that uh, economic indicators are always, or most of them, based on how much money do you have. So nowadays you have like GDP that are
That's
the
gross domestic product.
yeah. So how much of production do you have inside of your country?
Right.
That's what he's measuring, and this is the most famous and the more utilized indicator.
Mm-hmm.
When you pick up like the ranking of countries, oh, United States or China, they are fighting for the first position of world.
Mm-hmm.
When they say this, what they are telling you, they are talking about GDP.
Right.
So what are the GDP showing us? They are showing production, but they are not showing how the money are being used. They're not showing where the money are being used, and they are not even discussing how this money are created. But because if you pick up the GDP of United States or a lot of them is based on war. So do we really want a indicator that put you on the first economy of the world based on war?
War.
So it's a really questionable thing. Uh, so a good thing is, so how can we measure things? That's a really good point to me because we are talking about build a different world. So we want to show everyone like, okay, this is a good country, or you can talk about small scale. Like we are talking about Bosque Village.
Mm-hmm.
If we pick up Bosque Village as a, a place, this in mm, maybe all indicators that we have, the classical ones, the most used ones, you will be in an extremely poor area because you don't have water receivement, you don't have electricity, you don't have basic basic health like from bathrooms or things like this. So you don't have pavimentation. So you are in an extreme poor area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm staying here and I'm pretty sure that I'm really better than a lot of people in a lot of places. So that's why we should change our
So the
indicators.
indicators don't necessarily actually indicate quality of life.
Yes.
And also, I've noticed that there's some people who try and measure. There's websites for this. What the happiness of a country is,
Yes.
which is interesting because you
Yes.
could have a country with a really high GDP. They're producing a lot. They've all got lots of work to do, and maybe they're even polluting their country, and they're not happy at all.
Yes.
That doesn't seem like success.
Yes.
So GDP is not success.
GDP is it's a completely indicator that we should pass by. But we have good indicators, like we can use
Right.
Gini indicator is a good one
Gini.
because Gini,
That's
the
Gini?
coefficient, yes, the
Okay,
coefficient
G.
of Gini, it's measuring the disequality,
Inequality.
the inequality, yes, the
Right.
inequality inside of the country, and of course that you can measure inequality by uh, rent or by richness. So
Right.
it's like the money they're circulating or the money that people should have saved.
Right.
You have
So,
different kinds of
so, so,
measuring issue.
so you could have a really rich country in terms of GDP. You could even have a very wealthy country. But if it's very unequal, then it might be
Yes.
politically unstable. It
Mhm.
might indicate that there's some kind of serious problem. We
Yes.
probably would not be into that.
Yes, and including environmental indicators, that's a thing that should be put in all discussions.
They might be destroying their country while they have a high GDP.
Yes, they have a high GDP, they are a giant economy, but what are what are their costs
The environmental
of
costs.
the environmental? Yes.
And cut. That communication. So as we apply economics to permaculture, we want to think about economic indicators. What economic indicators do we use in economics?
Yes, that's a giant thing because the first question is how we measure things in economics. So how can I say this country is a good country? This country is good for is having a good track. And I think that uh, economic indicators are always, or most of them, based on how much money do you have. So nowadays you have like GDP that are
That's
the
gross domestic product.
yeah. So how much of production do you have inside of your country?
Right.
That's what he's measuring, and this is the most famous and the more utilized indicator.
Mm-hmm.
When you pick up like the ranking of countries, oh, United States or China, they are fighting for the first position of world.
Mm-hmm.
When they say this, what they are telling you, they are talking about GDP.
Right.
So what are the GDP showing us? They are showing production, but they are not showing how the money are being used. It's not showing where the money are being used, and they are not even discussing how this money are created. But because if you pick up the GDP of United States or a lot of them is based on war. So do we really want a indicator that put you on the first economy of the world based on war?
War.
So it's a really questionable thing. Uh, so a good thing is, so how can we measure things? That's a really good point to me because we are talking about build a different world. So we want to show everyone like, okay, this is a good country, or you can talk about small scale. Like we are talking about Bosque Village.
Mm-hmm.
If we pick up Bosque Village as a, a place, this in mm, maybe all indicators that we have, the classical ones, the most used ones, you will be in an extremely poor area because you don't have water receivement, you don't have electricity, you don't have basic basic health like from bathrooms or things like this. So you don't have pavimentation. So you are in an extreme poor area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm staying here and I'm pretty sure that I'm really better than a lot of people in a lot of places. So that's why we should change our indicators.
So the indicators don't necessarily actually indicate quality of life.
Yes.
And also, I've noticed that there's some people who try and measure. There's websites for this. What the happiness of a country is, which is interesting because you could have a country with a really high GDP. They're producing a lot. They've all got lots of work to do, and maybe they're even polluting their country, and they're not happy at all.
Yes.
That doesn't seem like success.
Yes.
So GDP is not success.
GDP is it's a completely indicator that we should pass by. But we have good indicators, like we can use
Right.
Gini indicator is a good one
Gini.
because Gini,
That's
Gini, the
Gini?
coefficient, yes, the
Okay,
coefficient
G.
of Gini, it's measuring the disequality,
Inequality.
the inequality, yes, the
Right.
inequality inside of the country, and of course that you can measure inequality by uh, rent or by richness.
Right.
So it's like the money that are circulating or the money that people should have saved. You
Right.
have
So
different kinds of
so so
measuring is true, but
so you could have a really rich country in terms of GDP. You could even have a very wealthy country. But if it's very unequal, then it might be
yes.
politically unstable. It
Hmm.
might indicate that there's some kind of serious problem. We
Yes.
probably would not be into that.
Yes. And including environmental indicators, that's a thing that should be put in all discussions.
They might be destroying their country while they have a high GDP.
Yes, they have a high GDP, they are a giant economy, but what are what are their costs
The environmental
of the
costs.
environmental? Yes.
And cut. That communication. So one of the things you wrote about was the Human Development Index as being one of the economic indicators.
Hmm.
What is that?
Well, it's an indicator that was one it's one of the most famous, and he really showed it up as an alternative to GDP. So a lot of countries nowadays use it for, you do use the income, but you're talking about education of the people, and they are usually using the number of alphabetized
Literacy.
literate,
Literacy rate?
yes, of the people. So you have like an age, a maximum age that all your country need to be uh, need how to read.
Yeah.
So they make this indicator, and they're talking about healthy.
Health?
That usually they use the born
Longevity,
no
infant
infant
mortality,
immortality. That's what I
right?
want to say. So yes,
Infant immortality? No, that would be interesting. So infant mortality, yeah, and of course we've
infant
seen
mortality.
infant mortality worldwide has plummeted,
Yes.
which is just great. That's a huge success story.
Yes. Yes. So this is, so you're not putting only income on human development, but you're putting two human discussions. That's education and that's healthy. So that's a point that I really want to pay attention, that why we need to study economy, and by indicators why we need to study statics, because that's incredible. That's how people are seeing and say, okay, things are getting work or things are not working.
Right.
When we're talking about, oh, if it's a good, it's a bad, as I said, usually it's based on indicators. So
Yeah, we have to try and measure things to try
yes,
and really understand
so
them.
if we change the things, the way that we are measuring, I can say this this country that are growing up their GDP, but by growing up by war, are growing up by pollution, are growing up by destroying the environmental, and growing up by alarging, like putting the distance between poor and rich strong.
Hmm.
So it's not a good way. You are not a good
Yeah.
track. You need to put this in real discussion.
When I think about that on a worldwide level, I think about a lot of other indicators that we should add in because
Yes.
I worry about the future of the entire world. So I'm like, what's the health of the ocean? How much biomass, animal life is there in the ocean? How are the algae doing that produce all of our oxygen?
Yes.
And I want to see graphs on all of these things
Yes.
because I think we're actually killing a large part of the
Yes.
world.
We do have one that they call footprint. They are really aggregated.
The ecological footprint.
Yes,
Right.
but it's a really nice one, and everyone can do your own footprint based on the website, and they
Right.
have a really good platform. Then if you send an email, they send you every platform in each country, in each state, and everything. So it's a really good one.
Right.
Aggregated, but it's a
So
really
you
good
can
one.
actually go to a website and you can enter in your data of what your lifestyle is like, how much gasoline you use to transport yourself, and you can
Yes.
figure out what your ecological footprint is. And in
Hmm.
some cases, they calculate how many Earths, how many worlds it would take to actually maintain the industrial lifestyle we're doing.
Yes.
And the problem is we don't have enough on the Earth to live the industrial lifestyle.
Yes.
And so some of the graphs I want to see, the economic indicators I want to see, are how the environment's really doing, how our consumption is going. So really, we're talking about a vast amount of data we need.
Yes.
That's wow.
Yes, and nowadays the discussion that are really like in Brazil, they are really strong right now because they are putting this on politics and they're voting and everything. It's about monoculture, polyculture, or about organics, and we do have a lot of searches about these things, but they are usually talk about productivity. So of course that if you pick up a monoculture and you see how productive they are productive in one thing, but we are not talking about biodiversity. If you put another indicator that's biodiversity, so you are changing the whole discussion.
Yeah.
So this is the main point.
Yeah. Good job. We're doing really good. All of the complexity of those indicators, really, I'd like to see data, and I know it's hard to see data. In fact, we can lie with statistics a lot. We can get very confused because we think we understand what's going on, but we're misinterpreting data. I know Hans Rosling is one guy that I love to see his videos and how he deals with data. One of the things I'm interested in is if I can see enough online of all the graphs of how we're using oil and if we're at peak oil or peak whatever. A lot of things are peak X because we're using so much and we're not regenerating it. We're not taking care of the world. I asked a question on Quora: in what year will there be less people on the earth than the previous year?
That's a good question.
It's a frightening question because everybody thinks we can just have infinite growth. And infinite growth does not occur in a relatively closed system. We have a very closed system on Earth. We have the sunshine coming in. Other than that, this is it. And so my thinking is if we see enough of these graphs, we'll actually be able to predict when human civilization will start to collapse.
Yes.
And that's frightening.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Just I say in other words, like I don't like saying statistics are lying, but I like to say that we are choosing different indicators. And that's the point. As I said, if you choose productivity and biodiversity, you are making a whole different discussion. So
right.
You're not actually lying because the database usually are a good one and usually are showing the results. But the difference in what principles are you have and what are you choosing to go to move to your main goal. So you're not lying, but you're choosing.
It's so if we were to put this in simple terms,
yes.
is what we're talking about really that economics is often focused on the economics of human civilization versus the economics of Gaia versus the economics of the entire planet. That's really what we're talking about.
That's really fantastic point.
Okay. So that was all big scale stuff.
Yeah.
When we bring that economic indicator set down to Bosque Village, I need to be thinking about that. And so I need to be thinking about my income, my expenditures, what kind of products I supply, what products are in demand. There's two permaculture principles that relate to this a lot. One of them is valuing the gifts of nature. Yeah. And of course we're doing that here. We come into the forest, and one of the goals is to be able to live, have humans near nature without totally destroying it. Which generally they do. We're really good at just using everything up. We take. And so we want to have some of those other indicators be how much biodiversity is there here? How can we increase the amount of wildlife? How can we increase the diversity of plants that are here? So we want to measure, like, what is the total tree mass of everything here? So I'm learning a lot from this idea as we try and apply economic principles to Bosque Village. So we're cultivating diversity. That's the other principle that we're doing here. I'm not a good businessman. We've talked about my financial situation. We've talked about my various ideas on how I can have income. So far, what I've done is I've been kind of too giving in a way. I've had the luxury of just spending money on experimentation and how we can do things. It's been really fun. But now I'm actually looking at my personal economic indicators, not just in terms of the Gaia stuff and the world stuff, but real money stuff.
Yes, the financial education.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's a thing where I'm cultivating donors who love the project. That's very important. We're looking at what product we provide. Also, we're looking at how we can serve people. Yes. Now, you here have gotten your permaculture design certificate.
Yes.
So that's a benefit to you. And there's probably not that many economists with a permaculture design certificate.
That's 1 point more.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I really think that we need to be connected because we believe in the same things, and we all there talking about permaculture, all that we are talking about solidarity economic, all that we are talking about buen vivir, or that we are talking about Steiner and the Waldorf education. We are There's a giant pack of discussions that they are on the same track. How can we build a post-industrial civilization? What is your future? We are all together building something different. So we need to be connected.
Yeah.
That's mine.
That is actually one of the most exciting things right now is that the internet is allowing us to share our successes and failures and how we're doing. Where it's really the world is saying hello to itself with the web. And so I want to track better what I'm doing and then share with other people. Other people in their projects, like this project, can track what they're doing and hopefully they'll be willing to share a lot of that. And we can all learn and improve how to live better economically, like in terms of dollars and cents and pesos and reales in Brazil, um, but also in all of the other indicators that people forget about in standard traditional economics.
Yes,
Beautiful.
that's it.
So we're applying these principles, these economic principles, to permaculture principles. How do economists usually think about resources and the environment?
Yes. Well, that's a point that I would love that in economy we change our vision, because environmental. What is a resource, by the way? Like, a resource is any kind of material, can be a people, can be environmental, that are producing uh, human welfare.
Okay.
So where are the nature, not the discussion? Where are the ecosystems? Ecosystems in economy, or actually, I'm always talking about uh, ambiental economy, and then I will talk because
Environmental economy.
ambiental. So good.
In English, environmental, I think.
No, because
No? Okay.
we have two differences.
Okay.
That one is ambiental economy, and the other one is ecological economy.
Okay.
So that's the difference. The ambiental discussion about economy, they are put it in a classical vision. So the nature is only it's only a resource
Mm-hmm.
that are producing welfare to the human.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are pointing like in two different points, you have the total preservation or the total devastation.
Mm-hmm.
And what we are trying to do is pick up a good point where we produce the most incredible welfare for humans, and that we can have nature for keep producing.
Right, and not destroy the environment that is actually sustaining us.
Yes.
Right.
So I think is that permaculture might bring the discussion in other terms, and then we can say that ecological economy talked with have more proximity to permaculture,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't want to put the nature as a thing that are away from economy. They are together. So if you are talking about uh, uh, environmental, you need to make sure that these are being countable. These are being uh, on the same discussion. You're not putting this as externality. Usually, like, that's a good point. Like, usually the ambiental economy put the environmental as externality. So he is on the other side of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
That's We don't want to do this. You want to put that environmental and the humans need to be treated as well, as
Mm-hmm.
this as one giant thing, as one
Yeah.
complex relationship.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns is that as a civilization, primarily that we're building civilization on stored sunlight. That's a resource that we're taking out, right? And that's a resource that's going to get more expensive. Now, I have friends that think we'll come up with technology that will make that better, but even something like solar panels is not even close to a perfect solution for that. That's still an industrial system that costs a lot. So I end up focusing a lot here in the Bosque Village on conservation and learning to use less in general. So taking less from the environment and then enhancing the environment instead of destroying it. So I'm very concerned that as a whole civilization, we're not only building it on a decreasing resource of cheap energy, coal and oil, but we fished out our ocean. Our ocean used to be full of huge animals, full of fish, and it's getting more and more costly. We're fishing out our whole. You know, even things like minerals, rare earth metals. And I've written about this online where I say what things are going to be peak X, like peak oil, and it's a lot of things. So we're in kind of big trouble because we're taking so much from the environment. And so the idea of being like an environmentalist or caring about the world, I don't think is some kind of crazy idea. I think it's a matter of absolute survival,
Yes.
that we stop destroying the planet and that we restore it to a better state. So we're learning about economics here as we apply economics terms to permaculture. One of the terms I've heard a lot in economics is externalities. What are externalities?
Okay. Externalities. Uh, we usually talk about externalities when you're talking about some effect that are being produced for one person, for one company, or for one object, and this effect is causing another effect in a third one.
Okay. It's
So
external to the primary interaction. There's an external effect.
yes, the object who are receiving an influence, it's not the same one that are producing. That's an
Right.
externality. But when we talk about economies, we are always saying that externality is not being considered in the price market.
Oh.
So that's the definition about externality. You are producing something, can be good, can be bad. Most of the cases, when we talk about externality, we are talking about negative externalities,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean that you haven't positive externalities, usually negative. So that this is affecting a 31, and these are not being considerable in the price market.
Okay. So they're almost always talking about money and products and prices and labor and businesses.
Yes, example, it's classical. It's like if you have a company that make t-shirts
Mm-hmm.
as yours. So for making this t-shirt, they are using colors, they are
Mm-hmm.
using painting,
Dye. Yeah.
and the rest of this they draw into a river.
Right. They pollute it
They
with the
pollute
dye.
it.
Yeah.
This river may be the water for some plantation, and these are destroying the plantation.
Right.
So we have a company who are producing pollution and who is affecting a plantation of the other one.
Right.
This is an externality,
Right.
and this company are not paying. They are not considering this on price market.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And that's really about consciousness of how complex systems work. So we can say, okay, we produce this product, we do this thing, but in truth, there's all these other effects going on. And so I actually get kind of philosophical about some of this. Like every action I'm taking, everything I do, everything I say is causing effect all around me. And I think it was an interesting point. You said that could be negative or positive.
Uh-huh.
I would like to make more positive externalities.
Yes.
Like when we use waste to produce something good, uh, and we should count up our negative externalities. Overall, I think humans have a lot of negative externalities to human civilization,
Mm-hmm.
that we're actually causing the destruction of the planet, and we're not doing it sustainably. So yeah, I think we should think about that in a much broader term than just business. You know.
Yes, that's a good point. Like, because usually externalities are related to environmental. If you keep
Right.
the traditional examples, they are already talking about pollution, air pollution, water pollution, or something that are damaging your healthy. They usually are related, and most of the cases they are related to environment. So you ask, why?
Right. Yeah, and for me here at the Bosque, I think about that a lot because some of the decisions I've made here have not been economically profitable, but we do things very slowly here, for example, so we can consider what are the effects. So it took me 9 years before I built some roads. They're just dirt roads, but before I brought in a bulldozer because I was afraid that I was going to have a negative impact.
Yes.
And overall, I've been very conscious then. I have a list of all the plant species we have here, and I want to think about the role of every one of those plants and how it affects the system, even people. Like I need to think
Yes.
about how you, as a visitor, affect the local community. And so it's really being conscious of our effect that matters. What are all the externalities we produce in our lives? Oh, that's a lot to think about.
I really like it that you talk about two things that including our two concepts that are slow and observe. I think that's the main point that permaculture can make a giant differences, because if you pick up the principles of permaculture, how permaculture are being thinking, and they are already talking about when you're doing a design of permaculture, you need to observe and take decisions slow. That's
Right.
completely different than what you're doing now. We are we are not observating, and that's why we have so much externalities,
Right.
and we're doing everything so much fast. We want results right now, but we want results right now, and this is not giving us the result that we want, and we are producing a lot of damage.
Right. And that's a different scale thing as well. Like we need to be thinking about 7 generations down. What
Yes.
world are we creating? So that's how slow we should be thinking.
Yes.
And certainly here we plant things that I'll be dead before I see the product of some of the like nut trees that I plant. So this is a whole different way of thinking, and it's less self-focused and more focused on the big system.
Yes. That's a real environmental conscience.
Right.
So thank you for having watching our series of videos about permaculture and economics. By the way, I really think that economics can be discussed in a lot of perspectives in our lives, and you don't need to be an academic, you don't need to be an expert. It's really good having ideas and talking about those ideas. That was our point here.
I love that. In your own life, you can apply economic principles to have a better understanding of energy inputs and outputs, which is what a lot of permaculture is really about. Permaculture is economics. And of course, here at Bosque Village, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to consider the immense diversity of the biological systems here and the diversity of the people who come here. All these systems play together. We want to get maximum benefit to build a better world for you. I hope you're on the team with us and you're implementing these kind of ideas in your own life. As always, feel free to donate. Please do donate. If you know of people who might be interested in the project, hook them up with it. Tell them about it.
Yeah.
We're trying to get deep with these ideas and really be conscious in a real way to make a better world for you.
Yeah, we make a better world connected. That's
Connected world, right. And thank you for your input and time here.
Thank
It's
you.
been really lovely to get your input.
For me too.
All right.
See you.
Adios.